What's going on, guys? This is Jonathan from the Coruscant Courier. Excited to have another theory for you guys today. You guys already know where we're going with this. Of course, it's going to be another Darth Plagueis theory, because Darth Plagueis has been the talk of Star Wars. There's some things that the Star Wars universe has not addressed with Darth Plagueis thus far that we wanted to get into. First of all, we see him appear in the final episode of Season 1 of The Acolyte. He makes his triumphant appearance and is on screen for about 5 or 6 seconds and goes away. It's interesting that Star Wars is deciding to bring Plagueis back into play. Interestingly enough, Episode 10 is coming out soon, and it's going to be a movie about Rey supposedly rebuilding the Jedi Order. This is interesting because in episodes 7, 8, and 9, there wasn't really a legitimate villain. We see in episodes 7, 8, and 9 that there was Supreme Leader Snoke, who of course died and barely got any screen time. And there was Kylo Ren, who was very whiny and didn't really have the ability to be a villain. Turns out to be a good guy in the end. And then you, of course, have Palpatine, who they brought back from the supposed dead. So we have to ask ourselves the question of why they're exploring Plagueis' story now. There's very little canonical information on Plagueis at the moment, but if we draw from legends, there's actually a lot of ways Disney can go with Darth Plagueis' character over the next few years. Not only are we going to get backstory from Plagueis, supposedly in Season 2 of The Acolyte, but we have to consider the possibility that Darth Plagueis is actually going to be alive in canon. Stick with me here. We know for a fact that Darth Plagueis was capable of cheating death. And of course, if you've read the Darth Plagueis novel, you've done any kind of reading in the EU about Plagueis, you know that he is a genius. He's a mastermind. He has learned how to manipulate the Force and midichlorians to basically where he can extend his life. Now, it was alluded to originally, despite Darth Plagueis dying and Palpatine essentially taking over the research that Plagueis had, not all of it, of course, as Plagueis didn't reveal all of it, but Palpatine was essentially able to clone himself and continue to live. Well, it's also hinted that in the Legends material that Plagueis' presence seemed to linger, and Sidious could almost sense the presence of Plagueis. Now, granted, that's completely Legends material, and it was also later noted that after Sidious fulfilled all of his ambitions, that presence went away. But we have to consider the possibility that maybe Darth Plagueis is going to be used in a future Star Wars project like Episode 10. Because Disney has failed to really give us any legitimate Star Wars villain. All of the greatest Star Wars villains have been created by George Lucas. We had Darth Sidious, of course Darth Vader, the most infamous villain of all time, and Darth Maul, just to name a few. These were excellent villains, and Disney has not been able to replicate that level of villainy. So it makes you think, what if they bring Darth Plagueis back in Episode 10? What if his spirit lingers and he is able to essentially come back into a body? Of course, this is completely conjecture, but we have to consider the reality that this would be writable. It would not be in violation of what Plagueis was studying. He could definitely pull this off. And what a story that would be in Episode 10. Rey recreates the Jedi Order and then has to deal with a reemergence in the Force of Darth Plagueis. This would also fix the horrible writing from Disney in Episode 9, in which the famous saying, "somehow Palpatine has returned," occurred. They could actually fill that back in using Plagueis. This would actually be a great idea from Disney, and they would bring a fan favorite villain who has gotten essentially no screen time into the canon and into a major Star Wars film. I think it would be incredibly popular. Plagueis was incredibly powerful and definitely could have thought ahead and potentially even waited for Sidious and the First Order to die out so that he could assume control. We even see in Episode 9 when Sidious survives that he had everything planned out for his survival, and we would have to assume, with Plagueis being as intelligent as he is, that he could have done the same and cheated death. We'll see how this fits in. Once again, this is just a theory, but you've got to admit, it is a very interesting time in the Star Wars franchise for them to reintroduce a character like Darth Plagueis. He's only been mentioned in word, never in form. And so for them to bring him in now does seem a little bit suspicious considering episode 10 is coming up. Would love to get your guys' thoughts on the possibility of Plagueis potentially surviving and being used somehow in episode 10, potentially as the villain, as we continue to get more and more information from the Acolyte. Maybe it's going to shed some light on where this is going. Appreciate you guys watching. Let us know what you guys think. May the Force be with you always.